Hey guys, tonight we drift beneath a sky that refuses to stay quiet. Clouds roll and hiss and the air itself feels charged, as if the ceiling above you has been strung with 1,000 hidden wires. Thunder rumbles like a giant clearing his throat, and then there he is. You don't exactly see Zeus at first, not in the polite, handshake at a party kind of way. Instead, you feel him, the weight of someone who believes he owns the storm, the mountains, and maybe even you. The king of the Olympians steps into your imagination with his famous thunderbolt, cocked lazily at his side, looking every bit the restless ruler whose power has made him far too comfortable with breaking his own rules. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, go ahead and type in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand on Olympus, and the mountain seems alive under your feet. Marble steps sparkle like frost, though you know marble doesn't usually glitter. Here, it does. The air tastes sharp, metallic, like rain just before it falls. And every sound feels doubled as though Zeus himself insists on echoing. You watch him pace. That's the thing, he can't sit still. He's restless, always searching, eyes flicking from horizon to horizon like a man scanning for the next shiny distraction. Zeus, officially, is the ruler of gods and men. Historians still argue whether the Greeks originally worshipped him as a localized storm deity, or whether he merged with older Indo-European sky gods. Either way, his resume is long: king of Olympus, keeper of justice, protector of oaths, punisher of liars. And yet, standing here, you notice the irony, because this guy breaks oaths the way you break a Kit Kat bar. Quick, messy, and with a grin like nothing happened. He shifts his thunderbolt between hands the way someone might fiddle with a car key. You wonder if that's boredom or performance. Either way, it's intimidating. You're reminded that in Homer's *Iliad*, even other gods hesitated to cross him, knowing a single bolt could turn the tallest tower to powdered rubble. Zeus knows this, and maybe that knowledge is part of his problem. When you can do anything, why not everything? As you watch, Hera passes by in the distance. She doesn't glance his way, but you feel the temperature drop. A god of storms, yes, but also a husband married to the sharpest eyes in the heavens. You think of that one neighbor who always knows when you took out the trash late. Multiply that by infinity and you get Hera. Zeus shrugs, like a guilty teenager pretending he didn't just Google quick lies that work. You notice the storm overhead thickening. It's as if his mood is contagious. Ancient Greeks believed Zeus's thunderbolts were crafted by the Cyclops giant one-eyed smiths, buried beneath volcanoes. That little fringe tidbit probably isn't in your average bedtime story, but it makes sense. When your weapon is basically portable lightning, you outsource it to professionals. You can almost hear the hammers striking, each clang like the heartbeat of the mountain. The funny thing is, despite all this godly theater, Zeus looks bored. His jaw slackens. His eyes glaze over. He taps the marble with his foot. Boom, boom, boom. You realize you're watching a man who cannot stay satisfied. And here's the cheeky joke for you. If the king of gods can't keep himself entertained, what chance do mortals have with their 9-to-5 jobs and microwaved leftovers? You probably won't survive this level of divine restlessness, though at least your boredom doesn't usually end with someone transformed into a swan. You think back to the stories you've heard, where Zeus disguises himself as animals, storms, even golden rain just to sneak into someone's life. And you sense that tonight you're at the beginning of that long, messy pattern. A sky god who claims justice but chases desire. A ruler whose lightning brings order but whose impulses scatter chaos like sparks on dry straw. You lean against a column and watch him smirk at nothing in particular. Somewhere in that grin lies the whole reason myths about him never stop. He's not just a character in an old story, he's the ancient reminder. That power unchecked rarely behaves itself. You inhale, tasting the metallic tang again. And you know the thunder is only just starting to roll. Zeus keeps pacing, and you trail a few careful steps behind. as though shadowing someone who can decide the weather with a flick of his wrist. His footsteps seem louder than they should be, not because he stomps, but because the marble wants you to hear. It amplifies him, like Olympus itself is complicit in the drama. You catch yourself thinking, well, if the mountain's going to act like a hype man, no wonder his ego is this inflated. You glance up, and sure enough, thunder growls again. This isn't coincidence, it's punctuation. Every move Zeus makes comes with a soundtrack, like the sky is an orchestra forever tuned to his moods. The mainstream historical fact here: ancient Greeks genuinely believed lightning was his way of communicating judgment. When a bolt hit the ground, people took it as Zeus literally underlining a decision, which means somewhere, some poor goat farmer once thought, well, the king of the gods just signed off on my fence post. Still, he's more than a storm machine. You look closer, and the god starts to resemble that guy at work who insists on listing every single one of his job titles during introductions. He doesn't just say, "Hi, I'm Zeus." No, it's, "I'm the father of gods, lord of the sky, overseer of justice, punisher of perjury, guardian of hospitality, holder of thunderbolts, friend of eagles, occasional shapeshifter, and oh yes, husband of Hera." You half expect him to hand you a business card so long it could double as a table runner. And yet, despite this impressive resume, you can't shake the suspicion that all these titles aren't enough. You see it in his eyes, darting from horizon to horizon, in the way he squeezes that thunderbolt like someone nervously cracking knuckles. It's a restless hunger. When you can claim dominion over almost everything, what remains except the thrill of taking what doesn't belong to you? Historians still argue whether these myths reflect moral lessons or simply coded justifications for the messy behavior of real kings. Either way, the stories cling to him like static, impossible to brush off. The fringe tidbit here: Zeus had priests who specialized in interpreting lightning strikes, almost like divine meteorologists. Imagine being paid to explain to villagers, yes, that bolt means Zeus is fine with you planting barley over there. But don't even think about olives. It's bureaucratic thunder. You laugh quietly. Bureaucracy exists even in Olympus. You watch him flex his shoulders, and the air shivers. He knows he's strong, and strength tempts him toward entitlement. The Greeks painted him with a massive, well-muscled body, beard flowing, a kind of eternal middle-aged fitness influencer. But it's not the muscles that worry you, it's the way he believes all those roles, all those titles. Give him permission. He turns to gaze down the mountain, and you follow his stare. Below lies the mortal world, cities with flickering torches, farms etched like patchwork quilts, rivers glinting like strands of silver. You almost feel sorry for the people down there, because you know they're not just figures in his view, they're pieces on his board. And he plays the game with casual cruelty. You think, if I were mortal living in sight of Olympus, I'd probably invest in a good disguise kit. Then a small, wry smile creeps onto his lips, and you realize he's spotted something or someone. That's when it clicks: his titles, his duties, his thunderbolt, they're all props in the theater of authority. But the real story, the one you're about to keep walking through, is what he does when nobody tells him no. You shake your head, trying not to grin at the absurdity. Imagine having all the power in the world and still acting like a bored teenager, sneaking out past curfew. The gods might respect him, mortals might worship him, but you, standing here, notice the cracks already forming in the marble for Wade. Zeus is restless, ambitious, and dangerously curious, and as the night air trembles with the weight of another storm, you suspect that curiosity will keep you on your toes for a very long walk. You follow the god a little farther up the marble path, and the air shifts in a way that has nothing to do with thunder. It's subtler, heavier somehow, as though Olympus itself is bracing. There she is, here emerging from a column of white mist, robes trailing behind her like storm clouds that learn to sow. She doesn't rush. Hera never rushes. Every step is deliberate, each glance sharpened into something that could cut marble. You realize this is the other half of Zeus's story. Not just king of gods, but husband to a queen who remembers everything. The marriage of Zeus and Hera is legendary, though legendary doesn't mean peaceful. The historical fact here? Their union was celebrated across the Greek world with festivals like the *Herai*, where women honored Hera as goddess of marriage. Shrines dotted the landscape from Argos to Samos, proof that mortals wanted the idealized version of this divine couple. Yet, watching them now, you feel the irony like a pebble in your shoe. Mortals toasted them as symbols of unity while the gods themselves played out a reality show, full of betrayal. Hera notices you, or maybe she notices Zeus pretending not to notice her. Her brow arches ever so slightly. You can tell she already knows. The fringe tidbit? Some myths claim Hera only agreed to marry Zeus after he tricked her, by taking the form of a helpless bird. Imagine that, the queen of Olympus, co-ruler of eternity, basically strong-armed into a wedding because she pitied a feathered conman. And you thought modern dating apps were messy. Zeus, for his part, shifts his thunderbolt from one hand to the other like a guilty schoolboy fidgeting with contraband. He mumbles something about important affairs of state, which would be more convincing if Hera's lips didn't curl into the faintest smile. The kind that says, *try again, buddy. * you recognize the look. It's universal. Historians still argue whether the Greeks crafted these stories as warnings about domestic strife, or as explanations for natural tension between sky and earth deities. Whatever the reason, the myths never shy away from showing Hera's jealousy and vengeance. She isn't just angry, she's cosmic in her retribution. You remember Io, the maiden transformed into a cow. That wasn't Zeus's idea of a prank. That was Hera marking her territory. The atmosphere between them tightens. Zeus clears his throat, thunder echoing like an accidental amplifier. Hera doesn't flinch. Instead, she turns away, walking toward the banquet hall where other gods pretend not to eavesdrop. You catch Apollo stifling a laugh behind his lyre, while Hermes raises his eyebrows as if to say, "Here we go again." It feels like the most awkward family dinner you'll never be invited to. Which, frankly, might be a blessing. You step closer to Zeus, and his sigh rattles the air. This isn't a sigh of regret, it's irritation. He's powerful, adored, feared. But at home, he's perpetually cornered. You almost want to whisper, *well. Maybe if you stopped flirting with mortals disguised as barnyard animals, she'd go easier on you, *. But you don't, because you like existing. The tension hangs like damp laundry on a windless day. You sense that every one of Zeus's restless choices will brush against Hera's sharp edges. And when gods argue, the fallout isn't just slammed doors, it's plagues, storms, and mortals caught in the crossfire. You feel the storm gathering again, and you know this marriage is less a bond of love, and more a cosmic tug-of-war played out across centuries. And here's your joke to soften the thunder. Imagine therapy sessions for these two. Zeus, maybe stop turning into farm animals. Hera, maybe stop immortalizing your grudges as constellations. You'd need a team of therapists, and probably a lightning-proof office dot as Hera disappears into the glow of Olympus. You realize you're standing on the fault line of their eternal drama. Zeus may be king, but Hera is queen, and neither one of them is ever going to surrender. You shiver slightly, not from cold, but from the knowledge that their marriage is the storm that never ends. You stay where you are for a moment, letting the marble cool beneath your feet, and you realize something has started to click. Zeus isn't just unpredictable. There's a pattern forming. Like lines on a map, his behavior repeats itself in loops: power, boredom, disguise, pursuit. You watch him drift toward the edge of Olympus, gazing down at the mortal world again. And you know exactly what's brewing. It always begins the same way, with that restless look. His eyes scan valleys, rivers, villages, like someone browsing a catalogue of lives. Historians still argue whether these myths of Zeus's endless wandering reflect actual religious practice, or whether poets just needed endless drama to keep audiences hooked. Either way, the result is the same. Zeus can't sit still, and when he moves, he leaves chaos trailing like confetti after a parade. You squint as he shifts shape before your eyes. One moment it's the bearded king with thunderbolt in hand. The next it's a plume of cloud that morphs into an eagle, then into a tall shepherd with kind eyes. It's dizzying. You almost laugh, because who else treats disguise like a hobby? Mortals play dress-up at festivals. Zeus plays dress-up with reality itself. And you know, from story after story, that behind each disguise is the same motive desire. Impatience and the thrill of the chase. The quirky tidbit here. Ancient vase painters actually loved depicting Zeus mid-disguise, often leaving hints so viewers could play a kind of spot the king of gods. A bull with suspiciously human eyes? Yep, Zeus. Ace one looking a little too smug. Zeus again. It's almost comedic once you know what to look for. The artists seemed to wink at audiences as though saying, you see what he's up to, right? Hera, of course, always notices. You remember her earlier look, the one that could carve stone. Every disguise Zeus puts on is also a red flag waving in her face. And you can tell the tension this creates isn't just marital, it spills into the cosmos. Hera's jealousy burns like lightning without the thunder, sharp and silent until it explodes. Zeus takes flight as an eagle now, wings stretched wide against the starry backdrop. You feel the wind rush from him, feathers slicing air so sharp it makes your hair flutter. Down below, mortals will see nothing but a passing bird. They won't know they're being watched by a king who should be sitting in council, handing out justice, not plotting his next escapade. The mainstream historical fact. In Homeric hymns and epic tales, Zeus was often invoked as the god who upheld Xenia sacred hospitality. He was supposed to protect strangers, travelers, and those vulnerable to abuse. Yet here you stand, watching him flip that role inside out, slipping into disguises precisely to trespass in the lives of those he should shield. The hypocrisy is thick enough to chew. You chuckle softly, though, because there's something undeniably human about it. Gods were supposed to be above mortal flaws, yet the Greeks gave their king the same vices you'd see in any scandalous tabloid headline. Maybe that was the point, to remind worshippers that even gods get messy, so mortals shouldn't expect perfection. Still, you wonder how those ancient storytellers kept a straight face. Imagine sitting around a fire saying, "So, the king of the sky snuck down again dressed as a bird." Classic Zeus. The storm clouds shift above, echoing his hunger. You think of all the times he's pulled this trick before and after the cow, the swan, the golden rain. Each story different, yet each the same blueprint. Power plus boredom equals trouble. You tuck that formula into your mind like a traveler clutching a map. It's the one constant. In the zigzagging chaos of Zeus's life, and here's your gentle joke for the night. If Zeus ever had a loyalty card for disguises, he'd have earned so many points by now he could redeem them for an entire new Olympus. Maybe throw in a free coffee to dot you watch his eagle form disappear into the horizon. And the silence he leaves is louder than thunder. You know the pattern has begun again. And soon someone down there will find themselves entangled in the restless whims of a god who refuses to stay put. The clouds part just enough for moonlight to spill across the slopes, and they're just below his Io. You follow Zeus's gaze and feel the strange ripple of inevitability. She is young, radiant in the glow of starlight, and her laughter carries up the valley like silver bells. You don't need a prophecy to guess what Zeus is thinking. The restless pattern you traced earlier has found its next victim. He swoops down in disguise, and you trail behind, cautious as ever, trying not to disturb the scene. At first, Io doesn't notice him. She's walking through a meadow, brushing her hands against tall grass, humming something soft and ancient. It's peaceful, almost painfully so, because you know how quickly peace cracks when Zeus is nearby. The historical fact here: Io was a priestess of Hera in some versions of the myth. That means she wasn't just any mortal girl, she was devoted to Zeus's wife, which, honestly, makes his pursuit a special kind of reckless. Historians still argue whether this story originated as a symbolic clash between local cults Hera, worship in Argos versus sky god worship of Zeus, or whether it was simply another dramatic tale told for audiences who loved a scandal. Either way, Io's devotion to Hera makes what follows even sharper. Zeus doesn't arrive as thunder this time. He softens, cloaking himself in cloud and shadow, whispering words only she can hear. You can almost feel the air shift, the way the grass bends toward him, the way the stars tilt just slightly closer. Io's smile falters, She senses power, irresistible and terrifying. She takes a step back, but the world seems to fold around her. Then Hera arrives. You know it before you see her, because the meadow darkens, the air chills, and the sound of hoofbeats echoes in the distance, though no horses run there. Hera doesn't need words. Suspicion is already coiled in her gaze. Zeus, in a panic, transforms Io into a sleek white cow. You blink, because one moment she's human. The next she's staring at you with wide brown eyes and a bewildered expression. That makes your chest ache. The quirky tidbit? Ancient storytellers sometimes added that Io mooed so loudly at her own transformation that nearby farmers thought a new herd had wandered into town. Can you imagine explaining that to your neighbors? No, this isn't a regular cow, it's the ex-priestess of Hera. Don't ask. Hera, of course, isn't fooled. She strokes the cow's head with a smile too sweet to be sincere. Then she demands the cow as a gift. Zeus, cornered, has no choice but to hand Io over. It's a devastatingly clever move. Hera knows exactly what she's doing. She sets Argus Panoptes, the 100-eyed giant, to watch the poor creature. Imagine being followed day and night by a bodyguard whose eyes never all close at once. Io can't graze, can't rest, can't even swat flies without Argus looming. You walk alongside the transformed Io, and your heart aches for her. She looks at you with those wide cow eyes, and you almost expect her to plead. You whisper softly, but the only sound that escapes her is another pained moo. Hera has trapped her not just in form, but in silence. Historians still argue whether Io's wandering across Greece, through the Bosporus, all the way to Egypt was a way of connecting different local myths into a single epic journey. Wherever the truth lies, her suffering became a thread tying cultures together. Imagine being remembered not for who you were, but for the miles of anguish carved into your footsteps. You want to comfort her. But what can you do against the will of gods? Hera is unyielding, Zeus is cowardly, and Io is left to wander, her hooves striking paths across continents. And in a twist of cosmic irony, her descendants will include Heracles, one of Zeus's most famous sons, proof that even in cruelty, Hera cannot escape the consequences of her husband's restlessness for a moment. You picture Io's story retold in today's world. Headlines might read, "Local priestess turned cow amid divine love triangle." It's tragic, absurd, and oddly comedic in that very Greek way where sorrow and satire sit side by side. You catch yourself chuckling, then sighing, because the truth is Io's pain lingers. As you watch her vanish into the distance, Argus trailing, you feel the meadow return to silence. But it's not the same peace as before. It's heavy, restless, threaded with the knowledge that Zeus's choices leave scars. And you know, deep down, this is only the beginning of many wanderings. You follow the trail of hooves and storm clouds until the air shifts again, this time warmer, saltier. The scent of the sea brushes your face, and waves lap against the shore below. A girl named Europa laughs with her friends, gathering flowers by the water's edge. The moment feels fragile, as though the tide itself is holding its breath. You already know Zeus won't let this stay innocent for long. He spots her and stills, the way a hawk freezes mid-flight when prey rustles in the grass. His gaze fixes, restless and greedy, and you brace yourself. You can almost predict the formula by now. Disguise plus pursuit equals scandal. And sure enough, there's a ripple of light, a shimmer of cloud, and suddenly a great bull steps out from the surf. White as polished marble, horns curved like crescent moons, eyes glittering with unnatural calm. The historical fact here, the myth of Europa explains how the continent of Europe supposedly got its name. Her abduction was retold from Crete to Phoenicia, making her story a bridge between cultures. Historians still argue whether she was originally a moon goddess absorbed into the Zeus cycle, or simply a mortal whose tale spread because it justified Cretan kings claiming divine descent. Either way, the story lingers like sea foam. Europa kneels, curious rather than afraid. The bull doesn't charge or snort. It lowers its massive head, letting her stroke its gleaming hide. You want to shout, asterisk, don't trust it, asterisk, but the air itself seems to lull her. Her friends giggle, daring her to climb onto its back. She laughs, swinging one leg over, then the other. The bull shifts beneath her, steady and calm. For one heartbeat, You think maybe this time will be different. Then the sea roars. The bull charges forward, hooves pounding against the surf before plunging into the water. Europa screams, but the sound is swallowed by the wind as the bull surges farther and farther from shore. Her friends cry out helplessly on the beach, their voices lost as the horizon swallows them. You grip your chest, because the helplessness stings even though you know where the story is heading. The quirky tidbit: some ancient coins from Crete depicted Europa riding the bull, her robes fluttering in the wind. It wasn't just a story, it was state branding. Imagine pulling out your wallet and seeing "Remember that time our ancestor got kidnapped" by a shape-shifting god, stamped on every coin. Subtle, Europa clings to the bull's neck, hair whipping around her face, salt stinging her eyes. She tries to pray, but the waves drown her words. Zeus doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. The disguise itself is his voice, his laughter hidden in the spray of the sea. He swims until the coastline vanishes, until only open water stretches in every direction. You hover above the waves, following them to Crete. There, the bull emerges onto the rocky shore, your Opa trembling but alive. Zeus finally drops the illusion, revealing himself in full thunderous glory. You see her expression twist from awe to terror to resignation, as though she knows resistance is pointless against the king of the gods. And here's your gentle joke to soften the salt air. If someone ever tells you to trust the bull, maybe check first that it's not secretly Zeus. It's safer to stick with regular livestock. At least cows don't double as abduction vehicles. Your Opa's story doesn't end here. She becomes Queen of Crete, mother to 3 sons who will shape legends: Minos, Rhadamanthes, and Sarpedon. Kings and judges, all of them, stamped with divine legitimacy because of this one stormy night. You realize that for Zeus, every fling isn't just desire, it's politics. His children anchor his influence into mortal kingdoms like roots into soil. Still, watching your Opa shiver on that rocky shore, you feel the cruelty of it. The continent may bear her name, kings may claim her lineage, but in this moment she is just a girl stolen from her life, caught in the restless hunger of a god who cannot stop himself. The waves crash, and you wonder how many more times you'll see this same story ripple through history, reshaped but never resolved. The sea fades behind you, replaced by the hush of night air and the rustle of reeds near a quiet riverbank. You hear wings beating in the dark, soft at first, then heavier, more insistent. When you glance up, you almost choke on your own disbelief. There, gliding above the water, is Zeus again, but this time he is cloaked in feathers. A swan, sleek, white, neck arched with impossible grace. You know what's coming because you've already seen his pattern: disguise, approach, and chaos. On the shore walks Leda, Queen of Sparta, the air around her glowing with a serene dignity. She bends to gather lotus blossoms, unaware that the creature circling above is not some ordinary bird. You almost want to call out, *run, please run, *, but you know your voice won't pierce the myth. The historical fact: Leda's encounter with Zeus is one of the most famous and debated episodes in Greek mythology. In many versions, she becomes the mother of Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships. Some texts, however, suggest Helen was the daughter of Nemesis instead, with Leda merely acting as foster mother. Historians still argue whether the Leda story was retrofitted to explain Helen's semi-divine status, or whether it was always central to her legend. Zeus swoops lower, his feathers gleaming under moonlight like polished ivory. He lands by the river, wings folding in, eyes shining with something not quite avian. You shiver because it's eerie, the body of a bird, the gaze of a god. Leda notices him and tilts her head, amused at first. Who wouldn't pause at the sight of such a perfect, unafraid swan? She extends a hand cautiously and he steps closer. The quirky tidbit: some myths claim that after this encounter, Leda laid not 1 but 2 enormous eggs, from which Helen, Clytemnestra, and the twins Castor and Pollux emerged. Imagine waking up to find you've become a royal henhouse. Ancient storytellers had a knack for blending absurd comedy into tragedies. The night deepens, and you can almost hear the river protesting with its steady rush, like it wants to drown out what's happening. Zeus presses closer, feathers brushing Leda's arms. The swan's wings curl around her, a gesture that seems protective yet suffocating. You avert your eyes. Not from gore. Greek myths don't need gore to unsettle, but from the weight of intrusion. Leda has no say, no chance. You feel that familiar helplessness building, the same ache you felt with Io and your Opa. Later, in stories told by poets and painters, Leda will sit with eggs in a basket, serene, as if this bizarre birth was natural. Ancient artists adored the scene, chiseling it into reliefs, sketching it on vases. Even Leonardo da Vinci centuries later couldn't resist sketching the queen with her swan. And yet, beneath the art, you sense the same unease you feel now, a myth that tries to make beauty out of violation. You wonder aloud if the Greeks had therapists. How would they unpack this? So, your husband's wife's sister's daughter is actually your swanbird child. The paperwork alone would break Olympus. Your light joke doesn't quite land in your chest, but you let it out anyway, because the heaviness needs release. And then the scholarly debate creeps back in. Was this story meant to explain the divine beauty of Helen, or was it satire? A jab at the absurdity of gods interfering in human lives? Historians still argue, and maybe that's why the myth endures. The ambiguity is as sticky as honey. The swan flaps its wings, stirring wind against your face. Leda looks dazed, as though she'll never quite escape the moment. You watch her walk back toward Sparta with a strange weight in her arms, and you know that from this union or intrusion will spring one of the greatest conflicts in myth. The Trojan War, all because a restless god couldn't resist another disguise. The river whispers on, as if trying to erase the memory, but you carry it with you. Another feather in Zeus's collection, another scar on history's map, and still the storm above Olympus simmers, promising more disguises, more victims, and more myths you wish you didn't have to watch unfold. The reeds fade, and now stone walls rise around you tall, smooth and cold to the touch. You're inside a tower, sealed shut from the world. No door, no window, only a slit of light at the top that barely lets the stars in. The air is heavy with the scent of iron locks and stale prayers. A girl named Dinah sits on the floor, her hair catching what little glow filters down. She's beautiful, yes, but more than that, she's trapped, hidden away by her own father. You pause, wondering why. The historical fact here: King Acrisius of Argos locked Dinah in a bronze chamber, because an oracle had warned him his grandson would kill him. Classic Greek prophecy. You try to dodge it, and all you do is walk right into it. Historians still argue whether the tower myth symbolized real ancient practices of secluding royal women, or if it was just another dramatic setup for Zeus's restless hunger. Either way, Dinah is alone, isolated from the world, a prisoner of fear. You hear the first crackle before you see it, a shimmer in the air, faint as dust motes in sunlight, then brighter, sharper, until the whole chamber glows gold. Zeus doesn't arrive with feathers or horns this time. He comes as rain liquid gold streaming through the slit in the roof, droplets glittering like falling stars. Dinah gasps, shielding her eyes. The rain doesn't wet the floor. It soaks into her, surrounding her like a veil. You almost laugh at the absurdity. Zeus has gone from swan cosplay to literal weather effects. If he ever runs out of disguises, he could open a Vegas magic show. The quirky tidbit: some Roman writers joked that Dinah wasn't seduced by divine rain at all. It was just a euphemism for Zeus showering her family with actual wealth, bribing his way past her father's defenses. Imagine explaining that. No, she didn't fall for rain, she fell for a golden bribe. Even in antiquity, people had their doubts, but Dinah doesn't doubt. She trembles, caught between awe and terror. The golden rain swirls around her, glowing brighter, warmer, until the chamber hums like a beehive. You can almost hear Zeus laughing in the downpour, delighted at his own cleverness. He always finds a way in. Bronze walls, locked doors, paranoid fathers, it doesn't matter. The Storm King doesn't accept boundaries. When the glow fades, Dinah cradles her stomach, dazed. You know what this means. Perseus, slayer of Medusa, rescuer of Andromeda, will be born from this union. Another hero stamped with Zeus' signature, another prophecy tangled in divine meddling. You sigh, because you've seen this pattern before and will see it again. Zeus chasing desire. Here seething, mortals left to carry the weight. The chamber feels tighter now, the air hotter. Acrisius will panic when he learns his locked-away daughter has a child. He'll try to thwart fate, casting Dana and her baby into the sea in a wooden chest. But the sea will carry them safely to Seriphos, because destiny doesn't care about human plans. And all of it, every ripple of fate began with Zeus. Disguising himself as a storm inside a prison, historians still argue whether these myths were meant to glorify Zeus as a life-giver or expose him as a cosmic trickster who bent every rule. Either way, the image of golden rain has outlasted the tower itself. Painters adored it, poets whispered it. Even Hollywood once tried to retell it with shimmering special effects that made audiences chuckle more than gasp. Yet here, standing in the bronze gloom, you feel no laughter, just the unease of seeing yet another woman caught in Zeus's unstoppable cycle. You try to lighten your own heart with a half-smile, at least this time. He didn't pick a farm animal disguise. That's progress, right? You shake your head. Progress isn't disguises, it's restraint. And restraint is the one thing Zeus never mastered. The chamber walls glisten faintly with the memory of rain, and Dana's quiet breathing fills the silence. You know her story is only beginning, and that the shadow of her son's heroism will one day eclipse her own suffering. Still, you carry the image of golden rain dripping through a prison roof, proof that no lock can keep out the storm. The bronze chamber fades, and you find yourself in the flickering lamplight of a modest palace in Thebes. The smell of oil lamps mixes with the musk of goatskin rugs, and there in the center of it all is Alcmene. She's calm, her posture regal in its simplicity. Though the weight of the world seems to rest on her shoulders, you realize you've stumbled into yet another link in Zeus's restless chain, the night. That will give the world Heracles. Zeus, of course, doesn't approach openly. By now you expect his theatrics. He stretches the hours of the evening, bending time itself so that one night becomes 3. He disguises himself not as an animal, not as rain, but as Alcmene's husband, Amphitryon. You nearly laugh out loud, because at this point Zeus has officially graduated from cosplay into full-blown identity theft. If he had access to modern technology, you're sure he'd be hacking passwords instead of shape-shifting. The historical fact here, Heracles was considered the greatest of all Greek heroes, and his divine parentage was emphasized in countless temples, hymns, and festivals. Yet historians still argue whether Heracles originated as a purely mortal hero, later adopted by Zeus in myth to glorify both. Was Zeus always part of the story, or was he stitched in later to give the strongman divine branding? The debate continues, but either way, the Theban palace becomes the stage for one of mythology's most famous births. Alcmene senses something is off. Amphitryon seems radiant, his eyes glittering in the lamplight, his touch almost burning. But Zeus cloaks her doubts in illusions of familiarity, whispering words only a husband should know. You shift uncomfortably, wishing you could warn her, wishing you could shout, *, that's not your husband, it's the Storm King playing house, *. But your voice is swallowed in the haze of ambrosial trickery, the quirky tidbit. Zeus lengthened that night so extravagantly that poets claimed it lasted 3 times, as long as usual. Imagine looking at your sundial and realizing the moon's been up forever. Some storytellers joked that the rooster nearly went horse crowing at dawn, because the sun simply refused to rise. Soon after, the true Amphitryon returns and, confused by Alcmene's coolness, learns of the divine impostor. The poor man must live forever in the shadow of Zeus's interference, his wife deceived, his child half god, half mortal. You almost feel sorry for him, until you remember he later tried to burn Alcmene alive for disobedience. These myths rarely hand out clean sympathy. And then there's Hera. You can practically feel her fury from Olympus. She knows at once. Another rival, another child carrying Zeus's spark. This time, however, her anger shapes history. She sends serpents to strangle the infant Heracles in his cradle. You picture the scene, tiny hands clutching snakes, crushing them with impossible strength. It's terrifying and impressive all at once. The baby becomes legend before he can walk, Historians still argue whether the trials of Heracles' 12 labors were originally about purifying him of Hera's wrath or whether they symbolized older initiation rituals. Either way, it's clear his life was stamped by divine conflict from birth. Zeus's pride in his son was only matched by Hera's determination to make the boy suffer. And in that tension, myth found endless stories. You look at Alcmene, exhausted, cradling her child. She doesn't know the full future how Heracles will wander the earth, slay monsters, and ultimately burn on a pyre to ascend to Olympus. Right now, she just knows her world has been upended by a trickster in her husband's form. You want to sit beside her, to tell her she isn't alone. But the myth sweeps you forward, relentless, and here's your joke. Because the heaviness needs a crack of light. If Zeus had lived in our time, you just know there'd be a public service announcement. Don't share your login with strangers, especially if they're suspiciously glowing. The palace fades into shadows, but you carry the image of Heracles' tiny fists crushing snakes, crying with the raw force of destiny. Another child, another consequence, another reminder that Zeus's restlessness reshapes entire generations, and mortals are left to shoulder the weight of divine drama. The palace walls dissolve into starlight, and suddenly you're deep in a forest. Pines sway overhead, resin thick in the air, and somewhere close you hear the muffled laughter of nymphs. Their voices rise like birdsong, quick and shy, until one laugh stands out lighter, almost trembling. You follow the sound and see Callisto, a huntress of Artemis. She's dressed in simple robes, bow at her side, hair tied back so it won't snag on branches. Her loyalty to Artemis is clear. She has sworn chastity, dedicating herself to the goddess of the hunt. And that is where Zeus enters. Because of course he does. You sense him before you see him, the storm pressed tight against the treetops. He doesn't arrive in thunder this time, but in another mask, slipping into the shape of Artemis herself. You almost groan aloud. After swans and bulls, now he's cosplaying as his own daughter. There's audacity, and then there's whatever this is. The historical fact. Callisto was a central figure in Arcadian myth, and her story was used to explain the origin of the constellation Ursa Major, the Great Bear. Ancient Greeks pointed to those stars and whispered of her fate. Historians still argue whether Callisto's myth was always tied to Zeus, or if she originally belonged to Artemis's cult as a cautionary tale about broken vows. Callisto greets Artemis, trusting, relieved to see her divine mistress. She lowers her bow, stepping closer. The forest hushes as though it holds its breath. You want to cry out, don't trust the disguise, but she smiles and it's already too late. Zeus reveals himself, shedding Artemis's form like a snake shedding skin. The deception leaves Callisto stunned, helpless, betrayed not only by him but by the face he borrowed. The quirky tidbit, ancient vase painters sometimes showed Callisto not in human form, but already as a bear, wandering confused through the woods. It was as if artists couldn't bear, pun intended, to capture the raw betrayal of the moment. So they skipped straight to the aftermath. When the truth emerges, Hera's wrath comes down harder than the pines can bend. Furious at yet another rival, she forces Callisto into the form of a bear. Imagine it, the once proud huntress stumbling on for legs, claws scratching against the bark she once leaned against, her voice reduced to growls. You can almost hear her heartbeat quicken with confusion and grief. Callisto wanders for years, hunted by men who once admired her skill. Worse still, her own son Arcas, born of Zeus, nearly kills her in the forest, not recognizing the mother beneath the fur. At the last moment, Zeus intervenes not out of guilt, perhaps, but to tidy up the mess. He sweeps both Callisto and Arcas into the sky, fixing them as constellations, the Great Bear and the Little Bear. Tonight, you can still step outside and trace her story written in starlight. Historians still argue whether this celestial ending was meant to soften the cruelty of her transformation or whether it was simply the Greeks' way of weaving morality into the stars. Either way, Callisto remains above us, frozen mid-prowl, her pain immortalized in the night sky. You stand in the forest and look upward, trying to spot those familiar dots. The irony stings, immortality disguised as honor, but really a reminder of betrayal. She didn't ask to be a constellation. She wanted to be a huntress. Zeus, restless as ever, turned devotion into tragedy. And here's your small joke for the evening. Imagine modern astronomers naming constellations. After awkward breakups, there's Ursa Major. Also known as that time Zeus couldn't keep his disguise straight. Star maps would be a lot more entertaining. The forest darkens again. Stars glimmering through the pines. Callisto's growls fade into silence. And you're left with the chill knowledge that even loyalty to a goddess like Artemis couldn't shield her. Above you, the great bear keeps watch, and you sense she always will, pacing forever through the sky. You step out of the forest, brushing pine needles from your shoulders, and find yourself on a marble terrace overlooking Olympus. The air hums differently here, not stormy, not heavy with jealousy, but edged with prophecy. Sitting calmly, almost calmly, is Themis. She is one of the old Titans, goddess of divine law, and when she speaks, her words bend the future. You notice Zeus nearby, restless as always, flicking a thunderbolt between his fingers like a gambler flipping a coin. Themis clears her throat, and the sound is like stone grinding. She doesn't scold, she doesn't shout. Instead, she tells Zeus plainly, every time he breaks his vows, every time he chases desire in disguise, he nudges the balance of the cosmos out of joint. You sense the weight of her words settling over the terrace like fog. The historical fact, Themis was often depicted as the personification of order and prophecy. Her temple at Delphi preceding Apollo's. People sought her wisdom long before the oracle of Apollo became famous. Historians still argue whether she originally held a broader role in early Greek religion, later overshadowed by younger gods. Yet here she is, reminding Zeus that law itself existed before him and will outlast him. Zeus frowns, clearly unused to lectures. He mutters something about being king, about thunderbolts, about authority. But Themis doesn't flinch. She explains that his restless adventures ripple through mortal kingdoms. Every illegitimate child shifts dynasties. Every betrayed oath weakens the trust of both gods and men. You feel her words striking deeper than any lightning bolt. The quirky tidbit? Some ancient writers joked that Themis had the unenviable job of organizing Olympian banquets, assigning seats so the gods wouldn't quarrel. Imagine being divine law incarnate and still stuck with seating charts. No wonder she had the patience to confront Zeus. You watch Zeus squirm. It's almost funny. This god who terrifies mortals reduced to an embarrassed schoolboy under the Titaness's steady gaze. For once, thunder doesn't rumble when he pouts, it's just awkward silence. The kind that makes you want to cough politely. Still, Themis isn't cruel. She tells him prophecy isn't destiny, it's warning. If he continues, the world will fracture. Heroes cursed, queens dethroned. Wars sparked over children of mixed blood. Yet if he can learn restraint, if he can honor his vows, balance might hold. You already know how this ends, of course. Zeus nods as though he understands, but the glint in his eye betrays him. The pattern is carved to deep. Historians still argue whether these prophetic warnings in myths were subtle critiques of real kings, ancient rulers who, like Zeus, flaunted power and ignored law. Maybe Themis was less a character than a reminder. Authority without self-control corrodes the very order it claims to defend. You lean against the balustrade, staring down at the world below. Mortals are tiny specks, building temples, planting fields, marrying, raising children. They have no idea that their destinies bend with the whims of the god pacing beside you. And tonight, Themis has spelled it out. Every fling, every disguise, every restless chase comes with consequences that mortals not Zeus must bear. For a heartbeat, you hope he'll listen. Themis's words hang in the air, steady as stars. But then Zeus yawns, stretches, and smirks. He'll go on, you realize. Themis may write the rules, but Zeus lives to break them. Here's your sleepy chuckle to cut the weight. If Themis had a modern job, she'd be that long-suffering HR manager who has to remind the CEO not to hit reply all. You can almost hear her sighing, Zeus, we've talked about this. Themis rises, her robes whispering like parchment, and fades into the mist. You're left with Zeus again, restless, defiant, lightning still sparking between his fingers. The warning has been given, but you know it's only fuel for the next round of chaos. The mist's words still echo in your ears as the mist parts, and suddenly you're not on Olympus anymore. You're standing in a royal hall below, polished stone floors reflecting torchlight, the air thick with incense and ambition. Mortal kings gather here, proud men with jeweled crowns and tired eyes. Their voices rise not in prayer, but in boasting. Each one insists his dynasty is stronger, holier, more legitimate. And how do they prove it? By pointing back to Zeus. You watch one king slam his staff on the floor, declaring that his great-grandfather was sired by Zeus himself. Another snorts, claiming his line descends from a different child of Zeus, someone braver, nobler, obviously superior. It's almost comical, like children fighting over who got the bigger slice of cake. The historical fact, in many Greek city-states, ruling families traced their ancestry back to Zeus or other Olympians. This divine parentage wasn't just pride, it was politics used to justify power. Historians still argue whether these genealogies were pure invention, or if they grew from local hero cults that later got absorbed into Zeus's mythology. Either way, his restless wanderings became the scaffolding of mortal thrones. The quirky tidbit: ancient inscriptions in places like Crete proudly listed kings as Zeus-born. Imagine carving into stone, "By the way, our king's dad was literally a god." Don't question his tax policy. Even coins sometimes bore symbols linking rulers to divine heritage, proof that myth was as much currency as silver. You look closer at the kings in this hall. Their pride shines brighter than the torches, but beneath it you catch a tremor of fear. They need Zeus's name to steady their rule. Without it, their power feels fragile, like clay walls before a storm. They invoke him not out of love but necessity. And you wonder if Zeus knows if he grins whenever mortals use his misdeeds as political glue. Around the edges of the hall, priests nod solemnly, reinforcing the boasts. They record genealogies, recite epics, remind everyone that yes, indeed, their ruler descends from the thunder-wielding king. But you can't help smirking. After everything you've seen Io mooing miserably, you're clinging to a bull's back. Leda staring at her impossible eggs. You know these lineages are less about glory and more about Zeus's boredom. One king stands taller than the rest, his robe stitched with golden thread. He proclaims that his line comes from Perseus, son of Dana, and Zeus's shimmering reign. Another scoffs, pointing to Heracles, stronger, braver, a better emblem of divine favor. The arguments grow so heated you half expect the ceiling to split with thunder. Zeus himself descending to referee. But he doesn't. He stays on Olympus, leaving mortals to squabble like children fighting over borrowed toys. Historians still argue whether these dynastic myths unified communities, or simply masked power struggles. Either way, standing here, you sense the irony. Zeus's wandering desires, each one so personal and impulsive, have become the bedrock of political order for generations. The chaos of one god trickles down into the laws of kings. You almost laugh, but you catch yourself. For these mortals, it isn't funny, it's survival. Without divine ancestry, their crowns are just shiny metal. With it, they command obedience, loyalty, fear, and yet, you know how fragile it all is. Prophecies twist, wars erupt, dynasties crumble. A single scandal, another restless night on Olympus can undo centuries of careful lineage. Here's your light-hearted thought to keep the mood from sinking to heavy. Imagine a royal family reunion with all of Zeus's claimed descendants. You'd need the world's biggest banquet hall and probably a megaphone just to handle roll call. Descendants of the swan? Over there by the fountain. Descendants of the bull? Left wing. Rain-born children, you're in the balcony seating. Absolute chaos. The hall fades as torches sputter, and the king's voices echo off the stone. You're left with the sense that Zeus's restlessness didn't just shape myths, it shaped politics, crowns and kingdoms. And though mortals puff their chests with pride, you know the truth. Their legitimacy rests on the whims of a god who couldn't stop chasing shadows. The Hall of Kings dissolves, and you find yourself outside walking dusty roads under a heavy sun. Around you, the world feels wider now, scattered with mortals carrying the weight of divine blood in their veins. These are the heroes, the half-gods, the children born of Zeus's restless disguises. They aren't kings with crowns and thrones, they're wanderers, fighters, legends in the making. And yet, every step they take drags behind them the shadow of Zeus's choices. You hear the clang of a sword, and suddenly Perseus is before you. His bronze blade gleams as he trains in a courtyard, sweat dripping from his brow. He's focused, disciplined, but you can't forget the shimmer of golden rain that led to his birth. His life began with prophecy and imprisonment, with Dana locked in her chamber. Now he carries a destiny bigger than himself, to face Medusa, to rescue Andromeda, to carve his mother's honor back into the world. The historical fact: Perseus was celebrated in Argos and later in Rome as a culture hero, a founder figure linking myth to civic pride. Historians still argue whether his story was originally independent, and only later tied to Zeus for prestige. Farther down the road, Helen of Troy glides like moonlight through the crowd. Her beauty is so radiant that you feel the air pause, as though every breath must adjust itself around her. She doesn't choose this power, it chooses her. Born from that infamous egg after Zeus' swan night with Leda, she grows into the face that will ignite the Trojan War. You can't look at her without thinking of ships, flames, cities reduced to rubble, all from a chain reaction that started with Zeus' restlessness. And then there's Heracles, broad-shouldered even as a boy, his eyes already heavy with trials he hasn't yet faced. You remember him strangling serpents in his cradle, Hera's wrath woven into his lullabies. Now, as he grows, you see the tension etched in every muscle. He will become the greatest hero of Greece, completing labors so impossible they sound like tall tales. Yet behind the glory is endless suffering, the price of being Zeus' son. The quirky tidbit: some ancient storytellers said Heracles' strength was so immense that as a child, he accidentally killed his music teacher with a single frustrated strike of a lyre. Imagine being that unlucky tutor. All right, kids, let's practice scales. Wait, what's that cracking sound? 1 second of impatience and suddenly you've got a legendary homicide case on your hands. As you walk among these figures, you notice something else. Their burdens are heavier than their triumphs. Perseus must face monsters to redeem his mother. Helen becomes a symbol of desire and destruction, blamed for a war she didn't start. Heracles, though worshipped, is tormented endlessly, forced into labors that nearly break him. You realize Zeus's children are less blessings than pawns, living embodiments of divine restlessness stamped onto mortal lives. Historians still argue whether Greek audiences saw these demigods as proof of divine favor, or as warnings about the cost of mixing mortal and immortal blood. Standing here, you feel it's both. People admired them, yes, but they also pitied them. Heroes carried their father's lightning as both weapon and curse. You glance back at the dusty road, stretching endlessly, scattered with faces both known and forgotten. How many demigods did Zeus leave behind? Too many to count, each one marked by strange births, impossible destinies, tangled fates. You think about the sheer logistics of it. All family dinners would need name tags. And Hera would probably set the table with poison dot and here's your joke for the night. To keep the heaviness balanced, if Zeus had to pay child support for every demigod, Olympus would have gone bankrupt centuries ago. Imagine the thunderbolts pawned off to cover alimony. The heroes fade into the shimmering horizon, their burdens etched into history. You're left with the uneasy truth: Zeus didn't just chase mortals for sport. He created lives, destinies, wars, all rippling outward from his restless desires. And though bards will sing of Perseus, Helen, and Heracles with awe, you can't forget the shadows trailing behind them. Shadows shaped like storm clouds. The dusty road dissolves beneath your feet, and now you're seated at a long, gleaming banquet table high on Olympus. The spread before you is overwhelming. Honey cakes stacked like bricks, roasted meats steaming with herbs, bowls of pomegranates glistening like rubies. But the food isn't what makes you hold your breath, it's the tension. The gods are gathered, cups in hand, eyes flicking sideways, each pretending not to notice the storm smoldering at the head of the table. Zeus leans back in his golden chair, thunderbolt propped against the arm like a casual cane. He laughs loudly at Apollo's story, nods vigorously at Athena's sharp remarks. But you see Hera across from him, her lips tight, her knuckles white around her cup. She doesn't speak, not yet. She lets the silence build, lets the whole hall simmer. You can tell every god here feels it too, the weight of another of Zeus's adventures. Freshly whispered on Olympus before dessert was even served. The historical fact: Greek poets often depicted the Olympian feasts as a place of both celebration and tension. The *Iliad* describes how the gods gathered around ambrosia and nectar, but arguments frequently broke out, especially between Zeus and Hera. Historians still argue whether these depictions reflected real Greek symposium culture, where drinking parties often included heated debates and rivalries masked as jokes. At one end of the table, Hermes smirks, clearly enjoying the show. Dionysus refills everyone's cups a little too quickly, perhaps trying to drown the awkwardness in wine. Meanwhile, Artemis glares into her plate, muttering about Zeus borrowing her form to deceive Callisto. You see her hand twitch toward her bow before she exhales slowly. Athena, calm as ever, keeps her gaze sharp, as if she's taking notes for some future courtroom argument. The quirky tidbit: ancient vases sometimes depicted gods at these banquets lounging casually, almost like Greek fraternity brothers at a symposium. Picture Zeus leaning back on a couch, one sandal off, laughing while Hera fumes across the room. The imagery is both absurd and a little too relative. You've seen family dinners just like this. Minus the THUNDERBOLTS. Finally Hera speaks, her voice cutting through the laughter like a cold blade. She doesn't shout. She doesn't need to. She asks one question, laced with venom. Was the disguise this time more convincing than the last? The room stills. Apollo strums his lyre nervously, the sound wobbling. Ours, never subtle, lets out a bark of laughter before Athena elbows him hard enough to make him choke. Zeus clears his throat, mumbling something about destiny and the will of fate, but the excuse falls flat. Hera doesn't look at him, she looks through him, her eyes promising consequences later. You almost feel sorry for him, except you've seen too much by now. He deserves the frost. Even here at a table overflowing with warmth, historians still argue whether Hera's role in these myths was originally meant to emphasize the sanctity of marriage or simply to dramatize Zeus's failings. Either way, her fury at these banquets became legendary, so legendary that mortals invoked her name during weddings, hoping she'd bless their vows instead of cursing them. Imagine standing at your altar, whispering, "Please don't smite me like you did Zeus." The tension grows unbearable. Hephaestus tries to lighten the mood by serving more ambrosia, his limp dragging slightly as he carries trays. But even his awkward humor can't pierce the silence. Everyone knows the pattern. Everyone knows the king of gods will not change. Hera's rage is as permanent as Zeus's restlessness. The only question is what collateral damage the next round will bring. Here's your gentle joke for the night. If Olympus had a family dinner survival guide, rule number 1 would be: don't sit between Zeus and Hera unless you're flameproof. You chuckle softly, though your eyes keep darting nervously at Hera's clenched jaw. The feast resumes in fragments, gods laughing a little too loudly, sipping wine a little too fast, but you know the storm hasn't passed. It's just waiting. And as the golden cups clink and the roasted meats cool, you realize these banquets aren't celebrations at all. They're stages where divine scandal gets dressed up as dinner, and where every bite tastes faintly of thunder. The banquet hall fades, and you're left walking down a colonnade where the air is quieter, more thoughtful. The chatter of gods is replaced by murmurs of mortals, philosophers in their cloaks, sandals scraping marble, hands waving as they debate. The agora of Athens stretches before you, buzzing with ideas. You drift closer, catching fragments of discussion, and realize they're not arguing about crops or taxes. They're whispering about Zeus. One elder, beard long and tangled like an overgrown olive tree, raises his voice. How can the god of justice, he asks, also be the god of endless betrayal? His words ripple through the crowd. Some nod in agreement, others mutter about blasphemy. You can almost feel the tension, reverence clashing with reason. The historical fact: Greek philosophers often wrestled with the morality of the gods. Xenophanes famously criticized how Homer and Hesiod depicted deities behaving like flawed mortals, cheating, stealing, lying. He argued that gods should be beyond such behavior. Historians still argue whether these critiques were early steps toward monotheism, or simply intellectual exercises in Athens' thriving debate culture. A younger thinker, perhaps a student of Socrates, counters with a shrug. Maybe the stories are allegories, he suggests. Zeus's disguises, lessons in the unpredictability of fate. His betrayals, reminders that power corrupts. You smirk because it sounds like the same rationalizations you've heard in modern classrooms. When someone tries to defend an obviously messy character, the quirky tidbit. Some symposiums' elite drinking parties featured debates about mythology as entertainment. Imagine lounging on couches, sipping wine, while someone slurs, "Hear me out. Maybe Zeus was just lonely." The crowd bursts into laughter, but the questions linger. You drift between groups, listening. One man insists that Hera's jealousy proves the gods themselves are slaves to passion, just like mortals. Another argues that myths aren't literal but symbolic, that Zeus represents the sky fertilizing the earth, nothing more. You sense how these debates blur the line between religion and philosophy, between reverence and satire. And then a sharp voice cuts through. If the gods act worse than men, why worship them at all? Silence follows. People shuffle uncomfortably, glancing at statues of Zeus towering nearby. No one dares answer too loudly. The weight of tradition presses against their words, but the seed of doubt has been planted. Historians still argue whether these criticisms reached ordinary people, or stayed confined to intellectual circles. Standing here, you feel both possibilities at once. The crowd whispers nervously, yet no one leaves the agora. Faith bends, but it does not break. You tilt your head back, gazing at the blue dome of sky. The irony strikes you while mortals debate whether Zeus is moral. The god himself is probably off in another disguise, chasing another mortal, leaving more questions in his wake. You want to laugh, but the philosopher's furrowed brows pull you back into solemnity. Here's your gentle joke, though. Imagine a Socratic dialogue titled *Zeus. Or why the swan did it? *. You'd have students scribbling notes like, Point A, divine justification. Point B, don't trust poultry. Philosophy would never be the same. The debate continues. Voices rising and falling like waves. Some defend Zeus, others dissect him. But all agree on one thing: myths reveal more about humans than gods. They're mirrors, not commandments. And as the philosophers drift into the evening, lamps flickering on the colonnade, you realize their questions will echo far beyond this city into classrooms, libraries, and even your own sleepy thoughts tonight. The hum of the agora melts into musical strings, drifting flutes, and the crackle of a theater torch. You find yourself in an open-air amphitheater, stone seats rising in a crescent beneath a starlit sky. The audience hushes as a poet steps onto the stage, cloak billowing, voice ready to shape scandal into song. You settle onto the stone, feeling its coolness seep into your skin, and lean forward. Tonight's performance? Zeus, because apparently his escapades never go out of style. The chorus begins, chanting in rhythm. They call Zeus Cloud Gatherer, father of gods and men, but then their verses twist into sly winks. They list Io, your Opa, Dana, lead each name landing like a drumbeat. Each story reshaped for the crowd. The historical fact: Homer and Hesiod both wrote of Zeus's affairs, but tragedians like Euripides and Aeschylus wove them into plays, reinterpreting the scandals as lessons or entertainment. Historians still argue whether these plays mocked Zeus outright, or used his behavior to comment on human rulers behaving just as poorly. The quirky tidbit: some comic poets in Athens openly ridiculed Zeus's love life on stage. Imagine standing in the crowd, wine cup in hand, laughing as an actor in a swan costume waddles awkwardly across the boards. Ancient comedy could be surprisingly blunt, and yet the audience loved it, proof that even divine misdeeds made great slapstick. You watch the crowd react. Some laugh, others shake their heads solemnly. A mother tugs her child closer, whispering that the story is a warning. A soldier nudges his friend, smirking as if to say, "Our generals aren't much better." The theater becomes a mirror, reflecting not only Zeus but the society that tells his tales. On stage, the The poet raises his arms and declares that Zeus's children Perseus, Heracles, Helen are proof of both greatness and curse. Their lives blaze with glory, yes, but also with tragedy sparked by divine betrayal. The chorus echoes, their voices blending into the night like waves against stone. Historians still argue whether these retellings softened Zeus's image or sharpened it into critique. You can't decide either. Sitting here, it feels like both at once. The poet makes the god larger than life, yet also ridiculous powerful enough to shape destiny. Foolish enough to chase mortals like a love-struck teenager. The air grows cooler, and the moon rises higher. The play nears its climax. An actor in Hera's mask storms the stage, voice sharp as thunder. She mocks Zeus, curses him, swears vengeance. The crowd roars with laughter and unease because they know Hera's rage is both theatre and truth. You feel goosebumps crawl your arms. This is art as survival, comedy as critique. Myth as a safe way to poke at the untouchable. And here's your little joke for the evening. If Netflix had existed in ancient Athens, half the catalogue would just be Zeus, the miniseries, Season Infinity. You'd binge it reluctantly, rolling your eyes, yet unable to look away. The chorus closes the play with slow, mournful notes. They remind the crowd that kings, no matter how divine, are still vulnerable to folly. The message lingers in the air long after the torches gutter out. As the audience disperses, you stay seated, the stones still cold under you, your ears ringing with the rhythm of scandal turned to song. You sigh, because you know this won't be the last time poets milk Zeus's restless hunger for stories. For mortals, it's theatre. For Zeus, it's just another night's entertainment. And for you, it's one more reminder that myths thrive not just on awe, but on laughter. The torches of the amphitheatre sputter out, and suddenly you're walking through echoing halls where marble statues tower above you. Cool stone presses against your fingertips as you pass, and you realize you've stumbled into the studios of sculptors and painters artists, who have spent centuries immortalizing Zeus's scandals in stone and pigment. Everywhere you look, his disguises, his flings, his children are frozen mid-gesture, as though art itself can't resist gossip. Over there, a statue of Europa clings to the horns of a bull, her hair carved in flowing ribbons that almost seem to ripple in invisible wind. Across the hall, a fresco shows Dinar gazing upward as a cascade of golden droplets streams through the ceiling. You chuckle under your breath. It's both beautiful and absurd, like turning tabloid headlines into Renaissance masterpieces. The historical fact, in sanctuaries across Greece and Rome, sculptors created elaborate works showing Zeus's various affairs. On temples, on vases, in mosaics, his adventures became decorative motifs. Historians still argue whether this was genuine reverence, or sly indulgence were people honoring the king of gods, or simply delighting in scandal dressed up as art. The quirky tidbit? One Roman wall painting depicts Leda cradling a very large egg, as if it were the most normal chore in the world. Scholars have noted how surprisingly casual she looks, like someone carrying groceries. You can almost hear the artist muttering, yes, yes, it's divine myth, but she still needs to hold it properly. You pause before another piece, a relief of Callisto, half transformed, arms stretching awkwardly into bear claws. The sculptor has caught her mid-scream, her face twisted between fear and confusion. You shiver because even carved in cold stone, her anguish feels alive. It's a reminder that behind every gleaming statue is a story that was never gentle dot in a corner. Painters mix pigments. One brushes brilliant blues into the folds of Hera's robes, her face carved with disdain. Another layers soft whites into swan feathers, a wink at the lead detail. You realize art wasn't just decoration, it was commentary. Audiences gazed at these works not only to admire divine beauty, but to remind themselves that even gods were tangled in drama. Historians still argue whether audiences laughed or prayed when they saw these images. Maybe both. A temple wall showing Zeus's flings might simultaneously inspire awe at his power, and a smirk at his shameless antics. You imagine standing in front of a fresco with friends whispering, "Classic Zeus again." It's not far from how modern people gossip over celebrity scandals. You run your hand along the cool marble base of a statue of Heracles, muscles bulging, lion skin draped over his shoulders. Even here, his parentage is never forgotten. Zeus's choices echo through every chisel mark. Art doesn't let him or you forget. And here's your joke to soften the gallery hush if museums today displayed captions as blunt as the myths. You'd read things like, Figure A, woman abducted by God disguised as livestock. Figure B, resulting child future demigod. Please no flash photography. The hall grows quieter as you move on. The statues loom silent and immovable, yet each one whispers scandal in its own way. You realize that sculptors and painters weren't simply honoring Zeus, they were recording, even amplifying, the stories mortals couldn't stop telling. Scandal became marble, laughter became pigment, and Zeus's restlessness became permanent. Etched into art that would outlast empires, you step back into the moonlight, eyes dazzled by what you've seen. The stars overhead seem almost like another gallery, constellations shaped by myths you've just walked through. You wonder if the heavens themselves are Zeus's most enduring artwork. The sky painted with the shadows of his unending appetite. The marble halls blur into shadow, and you find yourself in a torchlit cave. The air smells of smoke and herbs, and the walls drip with dampness. Hooded figures gather in a circle, their whispers blending with the hiss of burning incense. You've stepped into the heart of a mystery cult, those secretive rites where myths weren't mocked, or carved in stone but reshaped, softened, given hidden meanings. Tonight, even Zeus's messy reputation is getting a spiritual makeover. A priest raises his hand, and the circle falls silent. He speaks of Zeus not as the wandering adulterer you've followed, but as the eternal sky, the life-giver, the cosmic order that fertilizes the earth. The disguises, the flings, here they are explained as sacred unions, allegories of nature itself. You tilt your head, half skeptical, half intrigued. The historical fact, mystery cults like the Orphic and Eleusinian traditions often reinterpreted mainstream myths in symbolic, spiritual ways. They emphasized rebirth, cosmic cycles, hidden truths. Historians still argue whether these cults redeemed Zeus's image on purpose, or whether followers simply couldn't bear their chief god. Looking like a divine soap opera character, the quirky tidbit? In some Orphic hymns, Zeus is described as containing asterisk all gods and all things asterisk within himself, literally swallowing the universe and then remaking it. Talk about overcompensation. You imagine him bragging at a cult meeting. Not only am I king of gods, I am the gods. Also the trees, also your sandals. The initiates sway as the priest continues. Io's torment becomes the wandering of the soul. Your Opa's abduction is recast as the soul being carried safely across turbulent waters. Dala's golden reign is no longer about seduction, but divine light breaking into the darkness of human existence. You exhale slowly because the stories sound gentler here, wrapped in layers of metaphor like warm blankets over sharp stones. And yet, the more they talk, the more you wonder, is this redemption or just denial? Themis's warning lingers in your memory. Every broken vow unbalances the cosmos. Can painting Zeus as the sky itself erase the pain of Callisto, of Leda, of Alcmene? You doubt it, but you also see the comfort in the attempt. Mortals need their gods to be more than flawed rulers, they need symbols. Something to hold on to when storms break. Historians still argue whether these reinterpretations were widely accepted, or confined to small circles. Some evidence suggests the masses clung to the scandalous versions, laughing at plays and admiring frescoes, while only initiates whispered about cosmic allegories in caves like this. You feel both realities pressing together, the noisy gossip of the marketplace and the quiet chanting of hidden rites. One initiate leans toward you, eyes glimmering under the torchlight. Zeus is not a man, he whispers, but the breath that moves through all things. You nod, though part of you wants to add. Tell that to your Opa. Still, you stay quiet, because the moment is fragile, sacred to them. And here's your small joke to break the solemnity. If Zeus ever heard these interpretations, he'd probably take credit and say, exactly what I meant all along. You roll your eyes softly, because you know better. The chanting resumes, low and steady. filling the cave with vibrations that make your bones hum. You close your eyes and for a moment, you almost believe their version of God not restless and reckless, but eternal, patient, divine. But when you open them again, the torches flicker, the smoke swirls, and you remember the pattern. Zeus may be sky, or law, or cosmic order in their stories, but he's also still the swan, the bull. The storm of golden rain dot as the rite fades, the initiates bow their heads, satisfied. You step back into the night, the cave behind you glowing faintly like a secret too heavy to carry. Above, the stars blink with mischief, and you can almost hear Zeus chuckle, restless as ever. The cave smoke drifts away, and suddenly you're walking along scroll-lined corridors, the air dry with dust and ink. You've stepped into the minds of historians ancient and modern who sift through fragments of myth to uncover where Zeus's endless escapades began. Voices echo softly as scholars debate, parchment rustling like restless leaves. It's less thunderous than Olympus, but no less stormy. One scholar unfurls a scroll and points to a faded line. Zeus wasn't always the king of gods. In early Greek religion, he may have been just a sky deity, one among many. The historical fact: archaeologists have found inscriptions and altars dedicated to older, local gods of storms, fertility, and the sky. Historians still argue whether Zeus absorbed these deities as his cult spread, stitching together their myths into his own restless tapestry. Maybe Io wasn't always Zeus's victim, maybe she belonged to a local river god tale that Zeus hijacked. When his worship grew, the quirky tidbit, some think Europa's bull ride reflects an older Phoenician story about a goddess crossing the sea, absorbed into Greek myth when trade routes expanded. Picture it like a cultural mashup. Zeus photobombs someone else's legend and keeps the spotlight forever. You trail your fingers along another scroll. Its ink cracked but still legible. It whispers of Indo-European skyfathers, gods like Dio's in Vedic tradition or Jupiter in Rome, all sharing traits: thunder, rule, restlessness. Zeus might simply be the Greek version of a god humans kept reinventing across borders. You chuckle softly. Maybe it wasn't just Zeus who couldn't stop wandering, but his myth itself, traveling across cultures like an unstoppable hitchhiker. Historians argue in circles, voices overlapping. One claims Zeus's flings were moral tales, teaching mortals about consequences of excess. Another insists they were political propaganda, legitimizing dynasties through divine parentage. A third mutters that they were simply juicy gossip, entertainment before Netflix. You smirk. Honestly, all three sound right. You pause before a mural scratched onto plaster, a storm cloud painted above a kneeling figure, lightning striking down like judgment. It reminds you that in the earliest myths, Zeus's role wasn't about affairs at all. It was about order, punishing oath breakers, protecting sacred laws of hospitality. Somewhere along the way, that stern god turned into the restless trickster you've been trailing. Was it cultural need, poetic mischief, or divine PR gone off the rails? Historians still argue. The scholarly debate grows louder, parchment snapping in the air. Some point to cult practices in Crete, where Zeus was worshipped as a youthful fertility god. Others cite Homer, where he's already the thunder-wielding patriarch. The timeline blurs, myths overlapping like storm clouds colliding. You realize there may never be one answer, only layers upon layers of interpretation. Here's your soft joke for the night. If Zeus ever attended one of these academic conferences, he'd probably nod through the papers, then hit on three historians before the closing remarks. You stifle a laugh, imagining the scandal in the footnotes. The scrolls rustle, the debates fade, and you step back into silence. You're left with the sense that Zeus is less one god, and more a collage pieces borrowed from skyfathers, local deities, traveling myths. No wonder he couldn't stop cheating. His whole identity was stitched from restless fragments. You exhale, the air dry and papery, and let the voices fade. Behind you, the corridors crumble into shadow, leaving only the hum of unanswered questions. Somewhere above, thunder mutters faintly, as if Zeus himself is amused that mortals still try to pin him down. The corridors of scrolls crumble away, and now you're seated in a quiet study lit by lamplight. But the voices you hear aren't ancient. These are modern, firm, and sharp. A new chorus has entered the story: feminist scholars, poets, and storytellers who refuse to let Hera, Io, Europa, leader, or Callisto remain footnotes to Zeus's restless hunger. Their pens and voices reshape the myths, reclaiming what was stolen. You lean closer as a woman reads aloud from her notebook. She doesn't call Hera jealous or vengeful. Instead, she paints her as a wife forced to endure public humiliation, condemned for reacting to betrayals everyone else would rage at too. The historical fact: in much classical literature, Hera is cast as nagging or vindictive. But modern interpreters highlight how male poets shaped her image to excuse Zeus's behavior. Historians still argue whether Hera's portrayal reflects cultural anxieties about powerful women, or whether she truly embodied divine punishment. Either way, today's retellings refuse to mock her, they let her anger stand as strength. Another voice picks up Io's story. No longer is she just the cow who wandered. She becomes a symbol of women silenced, stripped of language, forced into exile. Her journey across continents is read as survival, not punishment. You feel the ache in that reframing suddenly. The mooing that once seemed absurd now echoes with dignity, a voice stolen but not broken. A poet speaks of Europa, not the trophy of a bull ride, but a girl ripped from her home, her body politicized, her name stamped onto a continent she never chose. You think of coins etched with her likeness, and the irony burns deeper. What the ancients turned into propaganda, modern voices unravel into tragedy. The quirky tidbit: some feminist artists in the 20th century painted leader not as passive, but as resistant, arms braced, eyes furious, wings tangled in struggle. One sculpture even gave her the swan's severed feathers clutched in her fists. Imagine Zeus wandering into a gallery and seeing that probably the first time he'd flinch. And Callisto no longer just the bear in the sky. Writers now tell her story as one of betrayal by both Zeus and Artemis, reframing her transformation not as punishment but as erasure. A woman literally written out of her own life. Yet, the stars above still shine with her shape, and modern voices say, that is survival, not shame. Historians still argue whether these reinterpretations distort the original myths, but you realize myth has never been fixed, it's always been retold, reshaped, bent toward whatever meaning mortals need most. And today, the need is justice. Here's your soft joke to lighten the study. If Hera had access to a modern talk show, she'd probably host Keeping Zeus Honest, with a laugh track and a weekly segment called Asterisk, Who Did He Disguise as This Time? Asterisk, the ratings would be sky-high. You watch the modern storytellers write, their pens scratching like thunder softened into ink. They aren't silencing Zeus, they're putting him on trial. They let Hera's fury be righteous, Io's wandering be heroic, Europa's theft be tragic. Leader's resistance be fierce, Callisto's stars be defiant. In these retellings, Zeus doesn't vanish, but he no longer gets the final word. The lamplight dims, and the voices fade, but you carry their strength with you. For the first time, the myths feel less like chains and more like reclaimed ground. And you realize, even gods can't keep mortals from rewriting the story. The lamplight fades, and now you're in a soft, carpeted room that smells faintly of books and coffee. A couch sits in the center, and you blink because Zeus is stretched out on it, thunderbolt propped against the armrest like an umbrella. Across from him sits a bespectacled psychologist, pen poised, voice calm. You almost laugh after centuries of swans, bulls, and golden rain. The king of the gods has finally landed on the therapist's couch. The psychologist begins gently, "Tell me about your impulses." Zeus shrugs, staring at the ceiling as though it holds constellations. You know where this is going. He'll say it's about power, desire, restlessness. But the therapist presses deeper, asking why he never feels satisfied. Why disguises and adventures keep pulling him away? The historical fact: modern psychology often interprets mythological figures as archetypes. Carl Jung, for instance, described gods like Zeus as projections of collective human traits: the father, the ruler, the authority figure. Historians still argue whether these archetypal readings enrich our understanding or oversimplify the messy layers of myth. The quirky tidbit: some therapists have jokingly described Zeus as the classic case of hypersexuality. Combined with narcissistic entitlement, imagine writing asterisk DSM entry, shape-shifting storm god who can't stay faithful. Asterisk, that's a clinical headache. The psychologist nods thoughtfully, scribbling notes. So, you're the supreme ruler, yet you constantly seek validation from mortals? Zeus frowns, as though no one's dared put it so plainly. You feel a flicker of satisfaction finally. Someone daring to puncture his ego without a thunderbolt overhead. You watch as the psychologist compares him to the archetypal sky father, distant yet controlling, protective yet intrusive. They mention that Zeus embodies the paradox of ultimate authority and ultimate insecurity. He commands the cosmos, yet he disguises himself like a trickster sneaking through back doors. You realize this duality is what keeps the myths alive. He's both terrifying and ridiculous, both god and man. Historians still argue whether myths like his were warnings against unchecked power or celebrations of it. The psychologist frames it differently. You're the embodiment of desire without boundaries. Mortals look at you and see both their fantasies and their fears. Zeus shifts on the couch, clearly uncomfortable. For once, thunder doesn't growl in the background. The silence feels heavier. You chuckle softly to yourself because you can't resist the image. Imagine Zeus in group therapy, sitting next to Apollo and Hermes, all comparing issues. My dad ignores me, my brother keeps stealing my cattle, and Zeus muttering, I turned into a swan again. The awkward silence would be legendary still. The psychologist presses on. Have you considered that disguises are ways of hiding from yourself? That you fear being seen for who you really are? The question hangs in the air like a spark. Zeus doesn't answer, just stares at the ceiling. Eyes flickering with storms he doesn't want to name. You step back, feeling a strange sympathy you didn't expect. Maybe his endless disguises aren't just lust or arrogance, maybe they're masks for a loneliness no throne can fill. But before the thought settles, Zeus smirks, rolls off the couch and picks up his thunderbolt. Enough talk, he says. You sigh. Therapy was never going to fix him in one session. And here's your joke for the night. If Zeus ever did commit to therapy, the poor psychologist would need hazard pay, storm insurance, and probably a panic button. The room dissolves into mist, leaving you with the lingering question, is Zeus just a symbol of power's corruption, or a mirror of our own insecurities blown sky high? Either way, his restlessness remains unsolved, scribbled across the cosmos like notes in a patient file to beak to close. The therapist's office fades into static, and suddenly you're standing in front of a glowing screen. Colors flicker across your face, bright, fast, unmistakably modern. You're inside the whirl of pop culture where Zeus hasn't retired to Olympus or to dusty scrolls. He's alive here too, strutting across comics, movies, memes, and video games. Still cheating, still ridiculous, still magnetic. On the screen, he appears in a superhero cape, booming with authority. Then the scene cuts, he's in a cartoon, belly round, eyes twinkling. Played for laughs as the bumbling dad of gods. You chuckle because it's almost comforting. Mortals never stopped retelling his scandals. They just swapped marble for pixels. The historical fact, Zeus or his Roman twin. Jupiter shows up everywhere in modern media, from Disney's Hercules to the video game series God of War . Each version picks a side: benevolent father, ruthless tyrant, or comic relief. Historians still argue whether these portrayals dilute the myths or keep them alive by adapting them for new audiences. The quirky tidbit: Zeus is a meme star. Twitter jokes, Reddit threads, TikTok skits, people can't resist roasting him. Zeus, god of thunder, also god of not keeping it in his toga. One meme even lists his disguises like a dating profile, likes long walks on the beach, turning into bulls and ruining your marriage. You scroll through a mental feed, watching mortals laugh at what once was sacred. In blockbuster films, Zeus throws lightning like grenades, flexes his muscles, and growls in theatrical accents. In comics, he's a grumpy patriarch whose kids keep rebelling. In memes, he's reduced to a punchline about questionable morals. And yet, the common thread remains: he cheats, he schemes, he can't sit still. Pop culture never lets him off the hook. You glance sideways and imagine him seeing this. Would Zeus be flattered? Probably. Offended? Maybe. But mostly, you picture him smirking, saying, "At least they're still talking about me." And he'd be right. Mortals don't mean gods they've forgotten. Historians still argue whether pop culture retellings on a myth or strip it down to cliches. Standing here, you feel both truths at once. Maybe Disney's family-friendly Zeus erases the dark edges, but memes bring the chaos roaring back, sharper than any thunderbolt. Either way, the old king of gods keeps trending. Here's your small joke for the night. If Zeus had an Instagram, it would be a disaster. Half selfies with lightning filters, half thirst-trap photos disguised as divine inspiration. The comment section? Hera, furious, spamming the anger face emoji, the screen shifts again, and you catch glimpses of other echoes. Your Opa rides the bull in glossy oil paintings hanging in modern galleries. Leda appears in ballets where swans glide across stages. Io's wanderings inspire novels about exile and survival. Callisto's constellation shows up in planetarium shows for sleepy school kids. Even when retold, the women's stories trail after Zeus, like satellites orbiting a restless planet. You sigh, a little weary, a little amused. Pop culture hasn't redeemed Zeus, it's just recycled him. And in doing so, it keeps the myths alive for late-night binge watchers, gamers, and meme scrollers who may not even realize they're inheriting ancient gossip. The screen dims, but the glow lingers on your face. You realize Zeus never needed temples or philosophers to stay immortal. All he needed was the human urge to tell stories and laugh at them. The neon flicker of the screen dims, and you're walking on uneven stone paths again. The air smells of thyme and sea salt, warm wind curling around your hair. Tourists bustle nearby, backpacks jangling, camera shutters clicking. You've landed in modern Greece, where ruins rise like broken teeth out of the earth, and guides still lean close to whisper the old scandals. Even here, centuries later, Zeus refuses to vanish. You join a group trailing through the columns of Knossos, sunlight painting the stones gold. The guide points to a faded fresco and says, "This is where your Opa landed with Zeus disguised as a bull." The tourists gasp and laugh. A few jot notes. The historical fact: Crete has long celebrated your Opa's myth, using it to root Minoan kingship in divine ancestry. Even today, the story survives as part of cultural tourism. Historians still argue whether the myth was originally Cretan, Phoenician, or Pan-Hellenic. Locals claim ownership with pride. Regardless, farther on, you pass a souvenir stand. There, among postcards and cake canes, a tiny bronze figurine of a swan sits beside a fridge magnet shaped like a cow. You stifle a laugh. Io and Leda reduced to trinkets for vacationers. The quirky tidbit? Some Greek airports even feature giant bull statues in the terminals, honoring your Opa's abduction. Imagine waiting for your flight under the shadow of a sculpture celebrating Zeus's worst pickup line. At Dodona, the oldest oracle site of Zeus, tourists cluster around rustling oak trees. Once sacred to him, the wind moves through the leaves, and the guide explains how priests interpreted the sound as Zeus's voice. Children roll their eyes, but you notice the parents lean closer, caught by the mystery. For a heartbeat, you almost believe the leaves really do murmur secrets. In Athens, near the ruins of the temple of Olympian Zeus, guides lower their voices for drama. They tell stories of Hera chasing Io, of Dana's golden rain, of Callisto lifted into the stars. Tourists giggle nervously, but they listen, cameras momentarily forgotten. You realize these myths survive not in dusty books but in living voices, retold every day to strangers in baseball caps and sandals. Historians still argue whether modern Greece should lean into these scandalous myths, or focus on Zeus's noble roles: protector of oaths, guardian of justice. But the tourists have spoken. They want the juicy stories, the disguises, the drama. It turns out scandal is excellent for ticket sales. You stop at a small cafe near the ruins, the kind with chipped tables and strong coffee. A mural on the wall shows Callisto as a bear, constellation glittering above her. A local winks at you, saying, "The old stories never die. They just change costumes." You smile because it's true you've followed Zeus through temples, Theatres, scrolls, memes, and now espresso-stained napkins. The restlessness follows everywhere. Here's your little joke for the night. If Zeus had a Yelp page, half the reviews would be about terrible customer service. At his temples, 5 stars for thunderbolt aesthetics, -3 for disguising as a farm animal to bother my aunt. The cafe hums with chatter, languages mixing like waves, and you sip your coffee slowly. You realize these tourists, unknowingly or not, are part of the same tradition as Homer, Hesiod, Euripides. They retell the stories in their own way over dinner on Instagram in travel blogs. Zeus's legacy isn't just stone ruins or dusty myths. It's laughter, awe, and the uneasy wonder passed from guide to guest as the sun dips. The ruins glow orange and the tour buses rev their engines. You glance back at the crumbling columns and for a moment, you imagine Zeus himself leaning against them, smirking. Not ashamed. Not apologetic, just amused that mortals still pay for tickets to hear about his disguises. The cafe chatter fades, and you're left alone with the ruins glowing in twilight. Your footsteps echo softly as you wander back toward the hills, and suddenly the silence feels heavy. It presses like the storm clouds you first saw on Olympus, whispering the question you've been circling since the beginning. Why didn't Zeus ever stop? You pause, looking up at the darkening sky. Stars wink into place. Constellations etched with stories you've walked through Callisto pacing as a bear. Your opus memory stretched across the sea, Leda's swan-feathered night. Each tale is a marker, proof of a pattern Zeus never broke. Power, disguise, pursuit, fallout. Again and again. The historical fact. Ancient Greek religion never demanded moral perfection from its gods. Unlike later traditions, the Olympians were worshipped not because they were virtuous, but because they were powerful. Historians still argue whether Zeus's endless betrayals were cautionary tales, explanations of natural phenomena, or simply campfire entertainment. But the bottom line is clear. There was no divine law against his restlessness. He was the law, and that, you realize, is the heart of it. Zeus didn't stop because no one could make him. Hera resisted, philosophers critiqued, poets mocked, but the storm kept rolling. In myths, power is its own permission slip, and Zeus carried that lightning like a hall pass through the lives of mortals. The quirky tidbit: some later writers in the Hellenistic period openly joked about this, saying Zeus cheated because immortality is boring. Imagine living forever and treating disguises like a hobby. Swans, bulls, rain-collecting experiences like stamps in a cosmic passport. It's absurd and yet painfully believable. You let the thought sink in and a chill creeps over you. It's not just about lust or boredom. It's about a cycle that never ends, the powerful taking because they can, leaving others to bear the cost. Io wandering as a cow, Dinar locked in a tower. Heracles cursed with impossible labors. These aren't accidents. They're symptoms of a storm that never changes. Direction. Historians still argue whether mortals actually believed these stories reflected divine truth or whether they treated them as exaggerated morality plays. But here you are, centuries later, still turning them over in your mind. And that's the unsettling part. Maybe Zeus never stopped, because mortals never stopped telling the stories. Scandal is sticky. It lingers, immortal as the god himself. You smile grimly at the irony. Kings built thrones on his name, poets spun comedies from his antics. Artists chiseled marble to immortalize his disguises. Even now, tourists snap selfies with statues of his lovers. Every retelling reinforces the cycle. Zeus didn't stop because we never let him. Here's your soft joke to cut the heaviness. If Zeus had a modern PR team, their slogan would probably be, "He's not unfaithful, he's just networking." You shake your head, laughing despite yourself. The ruins darken, the stars sharpen, and the night wind brushes against your arms like restless breath. You realize you've been walking through this story not just as a listener, but as a witness. Someone who's seen the pattern play out from swan feathers to golden rain to cowhide. And now, with the weight of it pressing down, you finally understand. Zeus didn't stop because storms don't stop. They rumble, they strike, they wander, and mortals build their lives in the shadow of thunder. You take a deep breath, letting the realization settle. The cycle isn't broken, but at least you've named it. And naming a storm is the first step toward weathering it. The ruins melt away, and you're back atop Olympus, the air thin and cool. Clouds drifting beneath your feet like rivers of milk. Around you, the whole journey unfurls Io, wandering with sorrowful eyes. Your Opa clinging to the bull, Dinar catching golden rain in a prison cell. Leda bending beneath white feathers, Callisto roaring in confusion as her arms become claws. You've walked every step of Zeus's restlessness, and now, standing here, the stories blur together like storm clouds fusing into one. Zeus lounges nearby, thunderbolt across his lap, as casual as if nothing happened. He stretches, yawns, smirks as though the scandals you've traced are just footnotes in his long resume. You almost want to shake him, to ask whether he remembers the women, the children. The war sparked in his name, but deep down you know the answer. To Zeus, these were diversions, ways to stave off the boredom of immortality. To mortals, they were destiny. The historical fact, ancient Greek worshippers prayed to Zeus not for fidelity or virtue, but for protection, rain, and justice in oaths. He was king because he controlled thunder, not because he was moral. Historians still argue whether the Greeks actually excused his behavior, or whether they simply lived with the paradox worshipping a god who broke the very vows. He was meant to guard, the quirky tidbit, in some satirical plays. Zeus's affairs were so notorious that actors joked he needed an assistant just to schedule them. Imagine Olympus with a secretary flipping through a calendar. Monday swan outfit, Tuesday ball disguise, Wednesday avoid Hera. You can't help laughing softly, because even gods need clerical help sometimes. You glance once more at the constellations overhead, Callisto pacing with her son, Io's path stretching east, your Opa's name stamped across a continent. The night sky itself feels like a map of consequences, proof that Zeus's disguises never stayed hidden. The stars tattled, the myths tattled, and mortals never stopped whispering. You exhale, long and slow. The journey has been restless, scandalous, absurd, and at times even funny. But it leaves you with a truth that's both weary and timeless. Zeus didn't stop cheating, because storms don't stop. They roll, they scatter, they break the sky, and then they roll again. And now, after miles of myth and centuries of retelling, it's time to let the storm drift. The thunder recedes now, softening into a distant murmur. You feel the air grow gentler, cooler, as though Olympus itself exhales. The marble beneath you warms, no longer charged with lightning, but steady, grounding, safe. You've walked through disguises and scandals, through laughter and sorrow, through the endless pattern of restlessness. And now the stories begin to fade like chalk washed clean by rain. Look at the sky one last time. The constellations no longer glitter with scandal, they shimmer like quiet lanterns guiding you home. Callisto no longer growls. She just drifts, serene in her place among the stars. Your Opa no longer clings to the bull. She floats free, her name glowing softly across the horizon. Even Hera, eternal in her fury, now seems to sigh, her sharpness softened by distance. Let your breathing slow. Inhale deeply, as though drawing in the cool mist of a mountain stream. Exhale slowly, letting go of thunder, letting go of disguise. Letting go of the chaos that has followed you section after section. The gods will quarrel, poets will gossip, mortals will whisper, but none of that needs to weigh on you now. Your eyelids grow heavier, like shutters closing against a long day. The voices of philosophers, the chants of mystery cults, the laughter of tourists all fade into a low hum, softer than the fan in your room, steadier than the crickets outside your window. Rest here, on Olympus, but without fear. The storm has passed for tonight. The marble throne is empty, the thunderbolt tucked away, the sky calm and endless above you. You are safe, you are still, you are drifting, and as you let yourself sink into sleep, remember, storms may wander forever, but dreams are yours alone.